of actions. We do this by creating capacities for exchange between cities to cities. So what you are presenting today is important for us for this city-country learning. We transform all this into knowledge, into evidence-based policy making. Therefore, your presentations are also appropriate for us in terms of urban solutions, of what works and why it works. Initially, the pavilion want to focus on Canada and the Canadian urban context. For that purpose, we have created the Canada Frontrunner of Urban SDGs. It's a program that wants to bring together under a common agenda different achievements, different opportunities, different creations that show to Canada and to the world what creative ideas can do in terms of producing a positive change for the world, a change in terms of awareness and in terms of showcasing transformative action. All this in order to respond to prosperity, to the increase of knowledge, the reduction of poverty and inequality, and to address climate change, among many other important pressing issues. Canada Frontrunner and the program that you are presenting wants to bring together the whole of society approach. And we want to document, to synthesize, to disseminate at global level. 100 Plus aspires for you to become a front runner of this initiative, to move from a selected pilot project to the front runner status. And the work that you presented for us is state of the art, is innovative, is cutting edge. And those are examples of pilot projects that solve problems, but also maximize opportunities. We have seen that cities all over the world, and of course also in Canada, are facing problems of climate change, of economic crisis, of structural inequalities, lately health problems. And some of them produce good results, but others excel in what they do in specific solutions. These excelling projects in terms of innovation and creativity are what we want to show in different areas. We call all this a creative capital, a capital that can be unleashed to better use local resources and assets, to maximize what your city can do, to produce comparative advantages of the city in order to increase societal well-being of inhabitants. The pavilion, what it's doing is to better establish, to institutionalize, to legitimize the solution in terms of best practices. We do that because we believe in partnership, in inclusion, in daring of presenting this, in understanding that this creative capital operates in very specific forms that we want to decant and understand. And we also want to understand that is for all society, private sector, civil servants, the community, local development actors, etc., that can contribute to the powers of imagination and creative transformation. We support then this knowledge, and we want to present of what you are going to show today in forms of what works, what can be learned, and which are the ingredients of success that others need to understand. For that purpose, we will present a specific report on your studies. We will do physical exhibitions as the one that are happening in the pavilion. We will have virtual pavilion exhibitions and also thematic events and conferences in different areas. Why we do all these things? And I would like to conclude with that. We do this on one hand to respond to something that is not very positive. And this is the SDGs development. We are exactly today half of the road of SDGs, and the analysis, the assessment of where we are today shows that we need to present these best practices in order to improve what we do. Let me show you some results. In the cities of the world, only 12% of cities in some specific targets are on track. 50% are moderately or severely off track, and around 30% are showing movements of regression in the 2015 baseline. So I said for something that is not very positive, but in reality it is to showcase that it's possible to advance in SDGs, and you are one of these examples of the world that is only 12%. We want to create a long-term perspective of this and to connect to financial opportunities for cities. Your presentation will help us in the future for your city to attract partnership, financial investments, and more programs and more projects. We would like to replicate what you are presenting, scaling up and showing innovative pilot projects to other parts of the world. And finally, we are aspiring as Pavilion to connect this, all what you are showing to us as a valuable tool to the Prime Minister's office, because he's the co-chair of the SDGs Advocacy Group of the United Nations. And we would like to present your results that we are showing today in different fora in United Nations as one of the important Canada contributions to support countries and cities in the world in the SDG achievement, and also in the sustainability road. Thank you very much for your presentations.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those opening remarks, Eduardo. And looking forward as what these events and these initiatives will help us do for the pavilion in terms of knowledge, innovation, and solutions. So I'll now move to introduce some of our speakers. And I'll call first up Peter Zimmerman to the floor. But before I introduce Peter, just a couple of housekeeping things. One, just as everyone's probably noticed, I have restricted your unmute and your video function. If you can still use chat, so please feel free to use the chat, ask questions there. We will open up at the end of the session, perhaps around noon. We'll open it up to more of a discussion and Q&A, and everyone, of course, can raise their hands and ask questions and follow up that way as well. And then just in terms of our objectives here today, we do want to feature some of the 100+ initiatives. But in parallel to that, as featuring the initiatives, we are looking to identify what are the ingredients of success, what are some commonalities among these 4 initiatives that we'll hear from today, that we can take and learn from, share with our partners and our colleagues across Canada, but also the globe as well. And the pavilion and the virtual pavilion in that sense would be integral at disseminating that information. So I will call Peter Zimmerman from Toronto Community Housing first to present on the Regent Park revitalization. And perhaps, Peter, before you present, you can give a brief introduction about yourself as well. Peter, I turn the floor over to you.
Thanks very much, Alex. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. Always enjoy an opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing in Regent Park. So I am the Senior Director in the Development Division at Toronto Community Housing, and I lead a team of planners, architects, community development workers who have been engaged in the revitalization efforts around Regent Park for more than 20 years now. So the planning began in the early 2000s, and we think we have about another 10 years or so of work ahead of us on Regent Park. So I've been associated with this project iteratively over the course of my professional career as a graduate student, as a volunteer, working with tenants who were initially interested in revitalization. Then later, as a young planner, working on the original master plan for the revitalization and some of the initial Regent Park replacement housing buildings. And now later in my career, coming back to lead hopefully the final stages of revitalization. And we're working on a new master plan for the final 2 phases, which will be part of the subject of my presentation this morning. So thank you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Peter. Did you have, sorry, Peter, you said you had a presentation that you wanted to share?
I do, yeah. So I'm going to, I've actually got myself on, it's complicated. I've got myself on 2 screens here. So I'm going to try to share from another, I've got 2 versions of me, I think, in this meeting. So I'm going to share from my, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Which
So I
which is
think,
your other name, Peter?
it should be
see.
me. Yeah,
I see you there.
okay.
Make co-host.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. So let me just get that up. And can everyone see that?
Yes, Peter. Looks great.
Great. Okay, so I'll jump right into it. So I'm going to start with the assumption that there are participants in this call who are not familiar with Toronto Community Housing, the work that we do generally, the challenges that we have within our portfolio, and how it relates specifically to revitalization in Regent Park. So to begin with, let me just go to. I should go to presentation mode, right?
Yes, please, Peter.
Yeah. And is that still before everyone now? Or did we lose it?
I think it may be loading, Peter.
Okay.
Yeah, and I see presentation mode. I see the. I think it's good enough. Please go ahead.
I can restart it, and if that's helpful. I'm sorry to take up the time on this technical matter, but let me know. Should I redo this? I'll stop sharing for a moment, and then I'll come back to it. And how about if I do that? Is that working better? Is that it?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so just as a matter of background, we're going to advance those slides. They're moving very slowly. There we go. So Toronto Community Housing is the largest social housing provider in Canada, second largest in North America. We own and operate more than 60,000 apartments across the city. We have over 110,000 tenants located in 350 communities. We have over 2,200 buildings. What's important to know about our buildings and our tenants is the following. One is most of our households have very low income, and most of our buildings are very old. Some of our buildings are over 75 years old. Majority of buildings are 50 plus years of age. Residents have very low incomes. 90% of our tenants pay rent geared to income rents. So very low income households who pay 30% of their household income in rent. And the rent that comes to us through our tenants only covers 43% of the operating cost of the portfolio. The rest of it comes from senior government subsidies. So what does all this mean in terms of where we're at in terms of the management of our portfolio? It means that we've got some significant challenges. I'll talk about that in a moment. So these buildings are old, and we have a repair program that calls for an average per suite investment of about $50,000 per unit. So we need close to $3 billion over the next 10 years in order to maintain our portfolio in a state of good repair. We don't have that money from net operating income from our rents, because our rents are low. So those monies need to come from one of a couple of places. Most significantly, it comes from senior government in the form of operating subsidies. Now, more recently, through the federal government, who is providing capital funding through CMHC for a repair initiative, and also some of the new construction of net new units that we're trying to introduce to our projects. So about Regent Park specifically. Regent Park is located in East Downtown Toronto. It's a 69-acre site. It was one of the first and largest public housing projects in Canada. First buildings were constructed in 1947. If you see Regent Park, or what's left of the old Regent Park today, you'll see something that resembles typical North American social housing. It could be Philadelphia, it could be Newark, New Jersey, it could be any one of a number of American cities, typical cruciform-shaped red brick buildings. The intention at the time was to create a garden community. The existing streets in the neighborhood were closed, and these buildings were placed in a park-like environment. So 2,083 RGI units, earliest ones 1947, later ones up until the early 1970s. Set in a park-like environment, no roads, no access, direct access to a lot of the buildings, no mixed income, so 100% low income, no services or very few services, and no retail. So people who wanted to go to a bank or go to a store had to leave Regent Park in order to get those services. So just a quick summary of the history of Regent Park. It was old Cabbagetown, South Cabbagetown, prior to the initial redevelopment, and it was part of a slum clearance program. The idea was to raise all of the existing housing and build this new community. It worked well for many years, but I think by the time we got to the 1970s, we started to see social problems arising in Regent Park that became increasingly pronounced moving into the 1990s. I would note that the whole effort and interest in revitalization, renewal of the housing in Regent Park really arose out of the tenant community themselves. So there were groups within Regent Park who were already talking about this idea of replacing the existing housing, building new, but very important to the residents of Regent Park was the idea that there was a strong community here. There was a group of tenants who were working together who wanted to stay in the community and wanted to be a part of this redevelopment effort. And I think that spirit that was articulated by tenants in the 1990s is what informed the revitalization work that we did moving into the 2000s. So it's a really important part of that story. And you know, one great anecdote about that period of time is that one of the young tenant activists working in Regent Park, who was one of the those calling for the revitalization of Regent Park, is now a federal cabinet minister, Minister Hussain, who is responsible for Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So it's a great story of where he began and where he is now. So by the time we got to 2001, Toronto Community Housing, which was, not going to get into this part of the history of it, but it was a newly formed company with amalgamating former housing companies in and around Toronto as part of the amalgamation of the city of Toronto. Started looking at the portfolio, and particularly at Regent Park, as to how we could renew the housing there, working with a very, very tight budget, and how we could work with our tenants to maintain the housing, maintain them in the housing in the community. So revitalization timeline, first plans for revitalization were approved in 2003 through a very significant developer selection process, we identified the Daniels Corporation as our partner for phase 1 of the development, and construction began in 2007. So those were the beginning of the first buildings. And at that period, working with our partner who worked with us on the first 3 phases of the project, the Daniels Corporation. So over that period of time between 2007 and 2018, we've been steadily moving our way through the first 3 phases of region. I'll show you a visual of those phases, replacing selectively the rent geared income housing and replacing it with a mix of market housing and new rent geared income housing and affordable rental housing. Also introducing new services, community facilities, and retail opportunities into the community. We'll get into it again in more detail in a couple of minutes. At the end of the phase 3 process, which we're just coming to the close on now, Toronto Community Housing elected to go out for a new request for proposals to identify a development partner to work with us on the final 2 phases of the project. And through that process, we identified Tridel, which is one of the biggest residential builders in Canada, as our partner for the final 2 phases. Through that RFP process, we determined that Tridel offered the best deal for the community, Toronto Community Housing, and the city. And significantly, it's something I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, they offered $26.8 million as a part of a community benefits process. And we're now working with the community to figure out exactly what are their priorities and where that money is going to be spent: jobs, training, events, and facilities that will be developed as a part of the final phases of Regent Park revitalization. So our approach to this work has always been in partnership, always have been working with a private sector partner. Private sector partner brings to the table construction expertise for our replacement housing, and they bring to the table market expertise. So everything is done in a joint venture. We participate in the planning and the proceeds from the market housing, and we get our housing built, our replacement housing built by our partner as a part of that deal. And I can talk about that partnership structure in greater length if people are interested in having a conversation about that. How we make these projects work. So we have 3 sources of revenue. We have land and the profit from the development that we do with our private partners. As we introduce some affordable rental housing into our developments, we have some debt capacity, so we're able to introduce some mortgages into the housing, so we're able to get some of the capital dollars covered through mortgages. And finally, we need grants. So even as we introduce market housing, there still is never quite enough money to do everything that we want to do in terms of the community infrastructure and the levels of affordable housing that we want to make sure are included in the mix. So there is always government grant that is brought to bear on these projects. We use that money for, obviously, the main thing is the rental replacement housing. We build new community facilities, and I'll talk about those community facilities in a moment. We spend a lot of time, effort, and money working really closely with our tenants. So every tenant who lives in Regent Park, has the right to stay in Regent Park and return to a new housing unit in Regent Park. So we have a staff group that works with tenants to ensure that that process works smoothly. We take care of their costs. If they have to move off site, we pay for their movement back. I see a question popping up, but I can't quite read it because I'm running part of this meeting off my phone. So maybe we'll get to the question in a moment. And we spend a lot of lot of effort on community engagement. And then there's a planning and administration function. So we're working now as a part of this team on the plan for phases 4 and 5. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's a significant municipal infrastructure component. And I know that there are people from the city of Toronto on this call. So I want to acknowledge the important role that the city plays in funding roads and sewers and other infrastructure as a part of it, as well as the community facilities that have been introduced in part of the revitalization. This is the slide that I call why revitalization is not redevelopment. So if it was just redevelopment, it would just be about building new housing, but it's not. It's about building a strong community, and it's about working very closely with our tenants. So it's about jobs, training. It's about building better housing. It's about introducing the services that they want, community centers, aquatic centers, new parks, making sure that there are retail opportunities that make sense for our tenants, and then using the scale of the development that's taking place in Regent Park as a lever to get tangible economic benefits for our tenants. So jobs, training, opportunities to become members of the companies that are working with us, and provide scholarships for tenants through the redevelopment process. A significant part of the revitalization plan and the thinking and the economics of it is the whole issue of sustainability. So I'll talk a little bit about sustainability in a moment, but it is a key part of the economic planning around Regent Park revitalization. So replacing buildings that just weren't making the standard, incredibly inefficient, with new state-of-the-art buildings, initially fired through a community energy facility. And now we're going to be looking at a ground source system for our final phases. Again, I see questions coming up. Alex, I don't know if you want to intervene. Do we want to deal with questions now? I'm happy to answer questions. I just can't. I don't get to see them while I'm in presentation mode. What's your preference there?
Peter, I think if you finish the presentation, and then perhaps we can take 5 minutes after you're done and go through the questions.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And then again, of course, these extraordinary community amenities that have been introduced to Regent. Again, another one of the interesting and unexpected challenges that we've had with Regent is that these facilities are so extraordinary that they're drawing in people from all over the city. And one of the legitimate concerns that we've heard from our residents in Regent Park is that it's hard to get into the pool. It's hard to book the athletic grounds because they're so popular in the broader community. So just a few of the highlights of our development efforts to date. Number one is it's actually the building I'm sitting in right now. It is one of our first rental replacement buildings built in Regent Park, and is also the home of our district energy system. It's in the basement of the building. Part of the reason why the building is as tall as it is is built around a large stack for the natural gas powered facilities that are in the basement. That, at the time in the early 2000s, was seen as the most efficient way of powering this community. We're now in a situation where the new green standards preclude the use of carbon-based energy for our final phases of the development. So we're actually not going to be able to extend the use of that facility, and we're in the middle of developing a new plan that will be based on zero carbon energy sources for those final phases of Regent Park. Two is just a part of the new community park, and in that park there's a greenhouse and bake ovens. Very, very popular. Many of us were in the park this weekend. It was packed with activity. Three is the new aquatic center, which is a fantastic facility we're all extremely proud of. 4 is the Daniel Spectrum, which is the arts and cultural hub of Regent Park. And number 5 is sort of a typical townhouse project within Regent Park. And 6 is the last thing I'll point out on this slide, is the Regent Park athletic grounds. And this kind of speaks to opportunities that presented themselves as we started down the path of revitalization. There was not a significant athletic facility in Regent Park as a part of the original plan, but MLSE is the company that owns the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Raptors, and TFC was so excited about the work that we were doing in Regent Park, wanted to be a part of it, wanted to make a contribution, and made a significant contribution for a new athletic facility. So the plans were actually changed mid-course to include this new athletic facility as a part of the revitalization effort. Phase 4 and 5, these are the final 2 phases of Regent Park. That's what we're working on right now. One of the things that we determined early on in the planning of phases 4 and 5 is that we were going to revisit the master plan. And densities have come up in the city. And again, there were other opportunities that have presented themselves. One is there was a request by Toronto Public Libraries to find a site for a new significant branch somewhere in and around Regent Park. So we redesigned phases 4 and 5 to incorporate the Toronto Public Library as sort of a center hub of a new civic square. And you'll see that in a moment. So it's response to opportunities, wanting to increase densities, wanting to increase opportunities for new affordable housing, led to a decision to look at a very significant rezoning of phases 4 and 5. And this is kind of what the plan looks like now. This month, we're really excited that we're going to be at Toronto East York Community Council with the rezoning. This has been done in 14 months. Again, hats off to our colleagues at the city who worked very closely with us to get us through rezoning in Toronto in 14 months. It's pretty extraordinary. It is a much higher density. We've gone from low rise and mid-rise to a mid-rise and high-rise built form. We've increased the number of housing units by over 1,000. 550 of those new units are going to be affordable rental units. We've created this new civic plaza that's going to have community economic development opportunities around it, and this new Toronto Public Library. It's also going to be a sustainable neighborhood. So as I said, the Toronto Green Standards that we're operating within, we take very seriously. We're looking at how we introduce ground source heat pumps into the system, how we tie this back into our existing district energy system and help green the existing district energy system. The buildings and the placements were designed to maximize sunlight into the new homes, and the courtyards are providing opportunities for community gardens. Economic development, I touched on. I'm gonna try to wrap this up fairly quickly. So the money that we are able to derive from the private development partners allows for training programs, event funding, space for community groups, and local employment initiatives. Again, part of this plan for phases 4 and 5 is $26.8 million in community benefits. We're in the middle of intense engagement process with the community to figure out their priorities. And then it's going to be incorporated into a public agreement between Toronto Community Housing and Tridel to ensure that that money is directed exactly where tenants in Regent Park want that money to be spent. So our lessons: adopt, remain flexible, embrace opportunities, mix at different scales. So we have market housing, affordable rental housing, RGI housing, all of this new retail and community services. Extract as much community economic development as we can and work very, very closely with the community throughout the process. And that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Peter. And I appreciate the last slide there, you sharing your wisdom on what made the revitalization a success. And it was clear that community's involvement is important for revitalization in general across all of Canada. I know that I said we would answer some of these questions here, but I do want to make sure that I get our next speaker in here. I know that they have a short timeline. So perhaps I'll hold the questions, and Peter, if you could stick with us, we can revisit it again following. So I will now ask Alex Taranu from the city of Brampton to present on Mount Pleasant Community. Alex, I turn over to you. Oh, sorry, Alex, I think I muted you there again.
Okay, okay,
There we go.
always the technology. Anyway, yeah, I started the video. I assume, oops, I'm muted. Do you hear me?
Yes, Alex, we hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Then I'm Alex Turano. I'm urban designer, planner, architect. I like to call myself urbanist. I worked the last 20 some years in the city of Brampton in a variety of positions. Right now, senior advisor, urban design in the environment and engineering division of the planning department. I was involved with the project I'm gonna speak since 20 years ago. And then, of course, you'll see it's very different than the one you just saw, Regent Park, because it's at the edge of the city. I was involved with the project as manager of urban design at the time, but some people know me also from my advocacy role with a number of organizations, with CAP, with RAC, with CANU, Council for Canadian Urbanists, and so on. Then I had the opportunity to lead, tours for people coming from many places for Mount Pleasant, and then I'm very pleased to be here. The last few years, I was particularly focused on sustainable development in many aspects: sustainable infrastructure, resilience, healthy development, and so on. Then I'm gonna try to be brief. I think I'll need to do the share screen. And I see the presentation. I wonder, do you see this presentation?
Yes, I do, Alex.
Okay, I'll start the slideshow to make sure the technology works. Do you see the screen or the full presentation?
It is loading
Oh,
for us.
yeah, because I have a dual screen and I wasn't sure which one you see the full screen or you see the presenter view.
I believe it's still loading.
Oh boy, okay. It's a bit heavy. I hope it's gonna work. Anyway, then while this is loading, I hope it's gonna work. Here I have everything. You are screen sharing. Maybe it's part of the system. Let me know when it's showing, Alex. Yeah, to mention a bit about this, it's at the edge, the current edge of the city, then deals with the term revitalization in a different way. It's about reintroducing, rebuilding nature. It's about making sure that we do it right from the first time, because as you know, in suburban development, we talk right now, I think our colleague, Professor David Gordon is here. We talk about retrofitting or urbanizing suburbia. And in this case, what we wanted to do from the outset to make it right. Do you see the slide?
It's still in the whole presentation. I see the slides on the left, and perhaps if you try going into presenter mode again.
Okay, well, I have that open. Let me, okay, close that.
If you try stop share and then reshare, that might help too.
Okay, stop share and reshare. Okay, and then share screen. My apologies, I don't use. Well, let's try in this instance to show the screen. I choose the file itself. Okay, and do you see now?
I see your third slide, yes.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I'll try to see if it works with the. Okay. Okay, let me see. Now,
Yes,
which
it's loading.
okay. Well, in case you see the presenter view, which I wasn't sure about that, or you see the full screen. Okay, then I assume I can start now. I'll try to be brief. I can go on forever, but obviously I need to keep within the next 50 minutes or so. It's part of the broader work on the urbanizing suburbia process that I mentioned, continues a long-standing tradition of greenfield development in Canada and North America in particular, but also around the world. And then you'll see that I use the term sustainable urban extensions as opposed to greenfield development because it has a different connotation. There is experience in the GTA starting in the mid-90s, and then Mount Pleasant started started around 2003. You have here a bit of the brief history. I'm not gonna stay for too long here, but when it started, very soon after, there was the provincial growth plan. This is about the policy at that point, the policy framework at that point. Regional transportation plan. This became a mobility hub. The GO station was created in early 2000 by before Metrolinx at that time was just GO. And then we continue with the planning of one particular component, so-called Mount Pleasant Village, completed around, almost completed around 2008. We benefited from grants for senior governments at that time. First phase of the village opened 2011. The broader community secondary plan with 2 block plans was approved in 2010. And one of the key components, the natural heritage system we rebuilt and recreated here, we're going to see in a minute slides about that, started in 2011. And at this point, the community is, I would say, probably around 85% built, but the South Village is the most important aspect that's going on right now in a very different direction. All along became a model. That's why we had all the visits and exchange of information. Then we are very happy to be able to share this resource with the wonderful program you're leading. Then Mount Pleasant community as a whole, you see a little bit here of the location at the age at the time of GTA, but right now, of course, it's engulfed in this big regional city of around 7 million people or so. It's on the line of the Kitchener line, a very important regional transit line, and was developed from the outset to have this comprehensive planning process, to have transit supportive, transit oriented, to have a strong urban structure. You see here some of the elements, some of the initial vision images that they came to life, sometimes even better than we thought. As I mentioned, was planned as complete sustainable community. It was a strong structure with a center around the GO station and continue with the main transit spine with those red points are the main transit nodes. And also along the green spine, which is this natural aspect, natural heritage system that we managed to build. Along the way, integrate active transportation, stormwater management, what we call nowadays green infrastructure. It used innovative planning and design process tools, and it was done in partnership. In fact, the residential component was done by private developers, and we did the government and the city did the amenities. And in terms of infrastructure, we partner, of course, all along. These were the initial concepts of what we call the secondary plan, which is the statutory planning in Ontario process, but we went at a different level in the very detailed urban design focus, infrastructure focus block plans as a kind of tertiary plans. And then that's complemented by pretty strong urban design, community design guidelines down to the process of the plan of subdivision, of site plan approval, and all along with architecture control, with control of the guidelines, and of course, with all this design review on many aspects of the community. One I mentioned, one of the very important element of this was the green spine, so-called, which is this natural heritage system that was planned after many years by the set of consultants with the conservation authorities, Credit Valley Conservation, of course, by the developer, and integrates man-made. This was just farmers' fields for many, many years, probably 150 years or so. And we recreated the water course, we recreated wetlands, we integrated stormwater management, we preserve woodlots. And those are early images from 2011 when this was very, very new. And now to show you that if you go there, you think you may be, I don't know, Northern Ontario or I don't know, North Bay or somewhere. The way nature really takes over, we just created this framework and it's aging extremely well. And many people don't realize this is in fact a man-made on former farmland, and help to clean the air, help to clean the water, including in the winter time. It's aspect of the wetlands. There's wildlife, there's habitat, and of course there's human habitat all around. One of the key aspects of this was I mentioned the community transit nodes, a little bit of example of we didn't even dare to dream too much of the apartments and the mid-rise and the high-rise, but the market show, yes, there is a market for that. And nowadays we have one of these nodes in particular having, 4 to 8 to high-rise level. All these driven by transit access, active transportation, and in terms of livability, you have an image here from the natural heritage system towards it. Very highly livable. Unlike many other suburban places, from the outset, we wanted to have a very strong emphasis of urban design on placemaking and character. We integrated nature. We created a variety of parks, public spaces. You're never more than 5 minutes from one of these parkettes and more than 10 minutes from the parks, and strong public realm programming, integration of local heritage. And you have here some of the aspects, and they go from integration of old farmhouses, including in some instances with the barns, integration of public art themed on that heritage of the place. And also very careful look at views, vistas, center nodes and edges, and the integration of blue and green infrastructure, as I mentioned. A little bit about the village itself. Try to be very quick through this. Compact, complete, walkable with urban character. Those are some of the initial renderings, and it was built very much the way it was anticipated. In order to make this happen, as I said, very unique transit-oriented development in Greenfield, I would say across the continent, not just the country. You need a strong vision, planning, design, including design review, funding, the way all this contributed, controls over the phase construction, operation, maintenance, continuous loop to go to update, strong engagement, and definitely partnership. This was done mostly with Matemi Developments. Almost in entirety, a bit of the plan, a combination of the radial plan, everything leads towards the mobility hub. And then you see some of the elements. In this case, we went well above the provincial guidance at the time to 122 people and jobs per hectare, as opposed to the 50 to 70 that was original in the plan. At the core of it is the square and the community hub. In fact, it's at the core of the whole community is this combination of the square itself, public amenity, partnership between the city, the school board to create this community hub of library, of the school, of the fields, with a lot of savings for the taxpayers, a lot of working together in terms of the access to amenities, access to programming. Part of that, we have a very strong focus on the programming of various urban spaces. This one in particular was subject to activities such as markets and many others. I'll show it in a minute. But at the core of the core is the mobility hub, the transit amenities. They include the regional GO Transit that became recently not just a terminus, but a very important intermodal exchange, if you want, combined with higher order transit of the city, with local transit, keep expanding. In fact, by now it's probably 4 lines there. Everything combined with active transportation for the last mile or kilometer, if you want, parking management, and public and design that facilitates this. You have here a bit of the latest and the greatest, which is the electric buses that started maybe a couple of years ago, and it's part of the whole electrification of the area. And Go is also, they did the recent service expansion for the all-day service into the weekend, and they're working on the third rail line with more frequent service by 20. We don't know exactly when, probably 2028 at this point. Active transportation, the first complete street, new complete street in Brampton, and the whole network. In terms of housing and built form, this was market-based affordability, but it was a variety of housing forms, quite affordable at the beginning. And as time goes, of course, with the whole market, the prices went up, but live work, mixed use, lane-based housing, townhouses, variety of them, apartments, they were quite challenging. And in terms of character and identity, I mentioned a bit about the heritage component, in this case, the rebuilt train station from downtown Brampton. Very interesting aspect here is a former church that's been converted to a mosque and has this cultural center as an addition to respond to the very diverse population of Brampton, and everything complemented by this railroad heritage team in terms of the public art interpretation. I mentioned a bit about the programming. The market was very successful. We still work on that. Winter programming, a lot of new residents of Brampton learn to skate in Mount Pleasant, of course, working with the school. Some of the advocacy work we did, there's a video present there to introduce particularly to new residents of the people, this neighborhood, with the whole idea that public realm brings everybody together. In terms of sustainability, from the beginning, we had our own system of guidelines and measuring sustainability of new development, where Mount Pleasant Village scored extremely well. Included also the healthy development work with the region of Peel, public health. And then definitely on the south side, we went to the next level. And this is a kind of key image that puts in a way, in a perspective, the resilience, sustainability, and healthy development aspects of the main park of the community. It's a very large park. This was an addition and more intensification. And you have here all the elements: integrated stormwater, with the water being recirculated, with the use of energy. You have the active transportation. You have somewhere in the back the new urban agriculture, public facilities, and of course everything deals with floodplain and flood mitigation, and then access to nature, as I mentioned. And to wrap up very quickly about the greatest, which is just coming right now, the Mount Pleasant Village, the south part that was a bit undecided at the beginning, but opportunity to intensify to the next level. Then the first thing was the mid-rise developed by Matami Developments, and then we keep updating the master plan for this area with the guidelines, and this is what was envisioned a few years ago. And now the reality is even better than what we expected, as I mentioned, with Daniel's developments, 2 phases. One of them, this photo is from November, but by now it's probably enclosed, and it has all the aspects, including ground source heat pumps and rental affordable housing with some funding from the federal government program. And now they're going into the next phase that started. It's finalizing the development, and it's very exciting to see this happening. It's a community within walking distance to the core, and it has all the elements and low carbon living. And you have here some of the data. And to conclude, going back to SDGs, we believe that this fits extremely well in the goal 11 as well as others. And I mentioned here some of the aspects that we think Mount Pleasant community as a whole builds very well in terms of affordable housing, accessible to sustainable transportation. Public transport was key from the beginning, as I mentioned. Inclusive, sustainable urbanization, dealing with, in some aspects, with water-related potential, the floodplain and the area, reduce the adverse. And right now we work on to gather a lot more information and data about this in the context of some other work the city is doing to advance the sustainability scores to the next level. Universal access is very important, I mentioned, in terms of the diverse positive. And then obviously the last two are very important in terms of the using this change and development as an engine for more sustainable change. And those are my conclusions. Believe that this is a good demonstration of the practice in Canada, apply smart growth, complete communities concept, has a strong planning design framework, integrates all these aspects, environmental restoration, reconstruction, and focuses on a variety of disciplines. We all work together. It's a huge team: sustainable infrastructure, streets, LID, stormwater management, extensive innovation and practices. And at the end is a demonstration of the SDGs.
Thank you so much, Alex, for the presentation. That was fantastic. And also some strong support from some of our colleagues here as well. Dave Gordon giving you some support there as well. Alex, just before we move on to the next speaker, perhaps if I can just ask you to speak a little bit more to the community involvement in the development of Mount Pleasant community. We did hear from Peter earlier about the money that's been set aside for Region Park priorities, and how the process itself really was led by the community. It sounds that the Mount Pleasant community had perhaps a little bit more of a top-down approach, but perhaps you could speak to that a little bit more.
Well, initially there were not too many neighbors, right? And in fact, to speak of, it was farmers' fields, right? There was a conventional community nearby. Then at the beginning, in fact, what we did mostly was in terms of, and even working with the developer, right? We tried to push for more live work and all that. And then they say, we're gonna lose our shirt. Nobody sold, greenfield-based transit-oriented development in the GTA and live work, right? But then as the community started to congeal, our efforts was more to bring people together. That's why the amenities became, and to try to encourage and in a way to pass the baton, saying, okay, we did the best we could, the market and everything else. And then we saw that kind of, community coming and they have interest. There were challenges as well. Like there were people, as an example, moving with 3 cars. I don't have room for 3 cars. Sorry, you're the wrong place, right? Then now it's a bit different when it comes to the later phases of development. And as you see, even Daniels, what they're doing is they promote low carbon living. And a lot of people moving here, they're moving because they believe in this. They want to walk to the market. They want to walk to the store. They want to walk to the park. They want to use active transportation. Then it's a bit of work in progress. More recently, we have a program called Nurturing Neighborhoods. And part of that, there were a number of walks and there were a number of cycling tours in a way to open the eyes of the local residents as well as others about what you have there. There is an education component related to the whole NHS, and you see the plaques, and then there's an increasing number of particular, nature tours. And I hope in time there's going to be much more of that, people doing, birding tours if you want, and watching nature and all that. And we saw there is a buy-in. Here, the idea was, as I mentioned, was try to do the best from the outset. You don't have to retrofit later on. And there is an education component for things like naturalization, stormwater ponds, don't cut grass, weeds, all that discussion about in particular suburban context.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Alex. And I do believe you have to go. If you're able to stick around, it would be fantastic.
No, I'll stick around. This is very interesting. And in fact, I heard Regent Park so many times. There's always something else, and absolutely, I look forward to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. And we will have discussion. So we're looking forward to hearing from you again after that. We have 2 more speakers before we move to the discussion portion. I will introduce Hugh Nguyen, who is from the National Capital Commission, to speak about LeBrenton Flats. Hugh, I turn it to you to introduce yourself and your initiative.
Sure. Sorry, I'm Waiting for the video to start. There we go. Sorry, it's that kind of pause in the virtual meetings to make sure everything is working. And maybe before I begin, I'm going to try to share my screen and hopefully this will work, but let's see, a moment. Okay, share screen. This part is probably where I'm the most nervous to make sure it works. Trying to put it on the presenter mode. Sharing. Okay, I think it worked. Does everyone see the cover slide? Or maybe Alex, you can confirm?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, awesome. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hugh Wing. I'm a senior planner with the National Capital Commission. I've been a planner for over 15 years now, mainly in the Ottawa area. Professor David Gordon was my professor back in grad school in planning, so it's kind of full circle for him to see me presenting on a project today. I mainly worked on city building projects in my career. I worked in the city of Ottawa for a long time, on the Innovation Center and also on the new Central Library. I've been with the NCC for about 3 years now, and during my time there, it's been solely on the Building LeBreton project. So I'm here to present on our new master concept plan, where we're now transitioning from having a completed plan into the implementation work. So we're really at the start of our build out. So I'm excited to present a couple of projects that we have going today. Just for background, the Building LeBreton project started in 2019, and this master concept plan was approved by our board of directors in 2021. So before I get into the project, I'll give a little bit of background on LeBreton. And this is an aerial view, probably in the last couple of years, but it's pretty current. It's been vacant since the 1960s. As you can see here, it's a larger site than I think a lot of people realize. It's 29 hectares in area. It's just outside the downtown core. On the top of your screen, you can see Parliament and the Peace Tower. Unfortunately, I have the same view from my window. I'm on the west side of LeBreton Flats, and because of the wildfires, my view is completely clouded from smoke now, but usually I can see the Peace Tower from my window. This area is a highly contaminated site. It's a large brownfield from its industrial history. It's a part of the reason why it hasn't been developed is because of the high cost to remediate the lands. The land value has increased over time, and partly because of our new rapid transit system in Ottawa. You can see 2 red stars, which represent 2 LRT stations that anchor the site on either side. The previous LeBreton Flats redevelopment project was canceled as the partnership of the proponent team dissolved, so pre-2019. The original offering was generally for this whole area, and it was to be developed by one group. So one lesson from that project is that it was a high risk to have one developer developing the whole site. So when that partnership dissolved, then this project was canceled. So as the reapproach how they're going to read LeBreton Flats, they took a different turn. They decided to create their own master concept plan, which was updating the Flats master concept plan from 1999. And it was also decided that the site would be developed by phase or parcel. So if one site didn't go through or was sold for some reason, it didn't block other sites from getting developed. 2 years later, 2021, after an extensive publication process, we have a finalized master concept plan. It's to be a net zero, carbon, compact, high density mixed use community that's supported by active transportation and transit. There's a dual purpose of this plan. It's for LeBreton Flats to be a destination and place of pride for all Canadians, which is part of the mandate of the NCC, and it's to be a sustainable and inclusive community for local residents. The plan is structured around 7 strategies. They include parks and public realm, mobility, land use, built form, sustainability. So within our sustainability plan, there's a commitment of net zero carbon buildings. There's also a culture and heritage strategy, housing and affordability. Within our housing and affordability plan, there is a commitment to 25% affordable housing for all residential units and 15% of overall units to be family units. The plan provides for flexible development targets over a 20 to 30 year period. Within the plan, it's 12.5 hectares of parks and open space. That's 43% of the site. There is 520,000 square meters of overall gross floor area, 4,000 dwelling units, 7,500 new residents, and 3,750 jobs post-construction. The plan is built upon 7 guiding principles, which anchors our approach to the project in terms of how we design and implement our work. They're listed on this slide here. The last chapter of our master concept plan is titled Achieving the Vision. This is an overview of our implementation approach and our phasing strategy. The section includes target, which we report to the NCC board on an annual basis. And maybe in terms of the master concept plan itself and why it's important to have a current master plan, it's really to set expectations for developers from the start, for example, design requirements, and also to have current policies incorporated in the municipal planning framework. For example, maximum building heights, as the development process is regulated by the municipality, and in this case, the City of Ottawa. This slide shows our phasing strategy. And as you can see, it shows our proposed parcels and sequence of development in the plan. The build out plan is for the next 2 to 3 decades. And the map is shown by early, middle, and late phase, with each phase representing a decade. The red parcels is the early phase, and we already have progress in 3 of those areas. I'll be speaking in more detail on parcel A9 and A10, if you're able to see my cursor. We refer to this area as the library parcel, as it's next to the new central library that's just to the north of it, which the name is Adasake. For the library parcel development, it's really our first land offering under the MCP. And it was in partnership with CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and it was through their Federal Lands Initiative program, which I'll refer to as FLI. Through FLI, CMHC buys lands that are put forward by a federal department or an agency, and then they actually put the offering out. They dictate how much affordable housing will be required, and they manage the procurement process for the land development. So the original landowner, so the federal agency or department, is out of the process at that point. But in the LeBreton case, since we had this new master concept plan, and we want to ensure that all the principles and targets were met, not just only for affordable housing, we decided to undertake a different and innovative process for the library parcel itself. So instead, the NCC managed the procurement or the RFP process and developed evaluation criteria that was based on the targets of the MCP. The RFP itself was worth 50% of the score, while the FIL criteria was worth 50%. Combining those scores together of a proposal through the RFP process, the proposal with the highest number of points was the successful proponent. So one thing that's different in this case is that the price was already set. CMHC had already purchased the lands from the NCC. So the evaluation was really based on evaluating best outcomes. The price was already set. The more affordability a proponent provided in the proposal is how the financing was determined in terms of the loans, the grants. And so the more affordability was provided, the higher the financing, or the better the financing that would be provided. So in terms of the proposals themselves, we were committed to a strong level of affordability. So that's in terms of number of units, depth of affordability, duration of affordability. We requested zero carbon design and operations in the buildings. excellence in architecture and design, benefits for the Algonquin Nation communities, and community benefits such as employment for equity-seeking groups for work and on-site amenities and services. So in terms of our successful proponent, it was Dream LeBreton. It was made of a team of highly qualified professional firms listed on the slide here. The team was led by Dream, which is based out of Toronto. I want to particularly point out Multi-Faith Housing. They're the not-for-profit housing provider for the team. And the proposal is for a mixed-use development, 2 towers of 30 and 35 stories, totaling just over 600 units. In terms of the number of affordable housing units, it's 41%. So a reminder that the minimum requirement was 30%. In terms of number of accessible units, it was 31%, and the minimum requirement was 20%. In this slide, it shows the general built form of the development, and the color shows the different ownership. So in this case, Dream and Multi-Faith Housing are both providing affordable housing units, and Dream is also providing market units. And so I'm just looking at my cheat sheet here. In terms of the affordable housing units in the West Tower, these are the Dream affordable housing units, and you'll see they're interspaced with the market units. The unit layouts are the same between the affordable housing units and the market units. And so it does really encourage mixed rent, mixed income units. And on the east building, the multi-faith housing units are on the lower levels between levels 2 to 16. And it has a high percentage of family units in the podium portion shown by the dark green. There was a strong sustainability component within our RFP. This proposal exceeded the requirements. Our minimum was that they were to certify to the Canada Green Building Council's zero carbon building design and performance standards. In this proposal, they'll also be meeting the LEED gold for neighborhood design as well as for new construction, and also looking at meeting the One Planet Living framework. Dream's net zero plan also relies on an innovation of turning the heat from sewers into energy. The site location is ideal for sewer or sewage heat recovery, as there are 3 large collector sewers coming together under this site. So this is a highly renewable and dependable source of thermal energy that can provide for annual energy demand for the development, paired with the solar panels that are integrated into the cladding of the building. 2 of the other evaluation criteria was a benefits plan for the Algonquin Nation, and secondly, a workforce development and community benefits plan. So we evaluated these on a quantifiable outcomes. We were looking for numbers, dollar amounts for contract value, number of jobs, number of training hours, number of apprenticeship positions as some examples of what were provided within these plans. Sorry, I kind of rushed through this library parcel example, but I wanted to kind of summarize the takeaways from this land offering that we did through an RFP process in partnership with CMHC. We really couldn't have done it without a partner such as CMHC. We worked closely with them, we collaborated with them. They allowed us to do this RFP process in a little bit of a different way than they normally would with a land offering. We had a set price. So in terms of the evaluation and in terms of the RFP, the proponents were really bidding on best outcomes and more outcomes than the minimum requirements. In terms of enforcement, it's really through the financing program of FLI and how it's really a loan that the developer is receiving from CMHC to ensure it's meeting its commitments of delivery of the affordable housing units. As well, we collected letter of credits for the sustainability plan and the workforce plan. As part of the RFP process, we also provided the draft copy of the agreement purchase and sale. So again, this is about setting clear expectations with developers and understanding what our requirements would be. So just my last slide here is that if you're looking for more information on the library parcel development, it's available on our website. We had a dedicated webpage. If you're looking for the actual master concept plan, that is available on our website as well in English and French. And we work on many projects within Building Work Breton. That's just showing kind of two recent projects, but we have other land offerings. We also do public realm implementation, and those projects are also on our main webpage. And feel free to contact me for questions as well. But I'm happy to have this opportunity to speak and share my experience on the Building Work Breton project, and happy to take questions and answer and have a discussion, because I think there's some really great projects and lots of similarities I've been hearing so far.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for the fantastic presentation. Before we move on to our next presenter from the City of Toronto, Jane, just a couple of questions for you. Hugh, one is myself, and then another from the audience here, specific to affordable housing. I saw that you had said 30% of the units would be affordable housing. That was a decision taken by the planners. And then the second question, if you can just define what affordable housing means in this case. Is it 80% of market rate, or is it the other definition set by, I think it's CMHC?
Yeah, so I think Alex answered part of the question. In terms of the definition, we relied on CMHC's FLI definition, and I'm a little bit rusty right now, but I believe it's 80% of the average medium rent was the minimum requirement. But there's other factors in the criteria in terms of there's a minimum length of time. Yeah, and don't quote me, it might have been 20 years, I can't remember, but if you provided 55 years or perpetual affordability, that would score you more points if you went beyond the minimum duration or the minimum depth of affordability. So if you did, I'm just using random numbers, 40% of the average medium rent, then you would get more points for that as well. In terms of the 30% requirement, yes, that was agreed upon between CMHC and NCC, but I would say through the FLI program, there are minimum requirements that are set with the price and the land offering. And so since this is a high density site, we're next to, in this picture, you can see Pimisi Station, and just in the forefront is the library parcel development. So it is adjacent to a rapid transit station. And so we knew minimum 600 units would be a requirement at 30% affordable housing units. So it was set high, I think, because of its location as well.
Awesome, fantastic, Hugh. And as I mentioned throughout the last hour, we will move to a discussion after this last speaker here. So of course, Hugh, please do stick around. So I am moving to our final speaker now, which is Jane Welsh from the City of Toronto, and also Lisa King, who was unfortunately unable to make it today. But Jane will present the Toronto Green Development Standards. And I will say, Jane, that I'm particularly excited for your presentation here. Being a policy individual myself, I find it quite fascinating, quite interesting how these standards have really pulled the private sector towards more sustainability and environmental practices. So Jane, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Certainly. Thanks very much, Alex. So I have pressed this share screen button, but oh, there we go. So I am on screen 2. Now, what do you see?
I see your presentation, just not in presenter mode.
Okay, I will do that then. Okay, all good. All right, thanks very much. So my name is Jane Welsh, and I am the project manager for a small team in Toronto City Planning. We're the environmental planning team, and our responsibilities are everything to do with environment and climate change and land use planning. So for example, in addition to the Toronto Green Standard, we do the environment and climate policies for the official plan. We do the Toronto Green Roof Bylaw. We do work with forestry on the Ravine Natural Features Protection Bylaw. And it's really about, and as Alex mentioned, it's really Lisa King who had submitted this application, so it's unfortunate she couldn't be here today. But what our team is really about raising the bar. So we've been working on this since about 2005, really about normalizing or socializing expectations. So how do we raise the expectations so that really you want to make what we've introduced as policy as the rules. So if you think of official plans, they set out policy, and the building code and the zoning bylaw are really, the precision to the visionary statements. So that's where we're going. And it's a lot, there's also this tension, which I'll talk about through the presentation about, what are the rules and what are the incentives? Because how do you move that needle over to where everybody just expects that they have to build green? So it's a challenge that we've been dealing with for a long time. So as everybody probably is aware, Toronto is growing very, very quickly, and we do expect to reach a population of 3.6 million by 2051. But that means there's lots of opportunity. It means it's incredibly important that what's going in the ground now, what's being planned now, is built to a sustainable level, because it's going to come back to haunt us in the future if it doesn't. Toronto, like many cities, is dealing with climate change. That means more severe weather events, and that means more heat waves in the summer. So we set a goal for ourselves to reach net zero by 2040. And as you can see from the slide, that goal is kind of down there in the darker blue. You can see, business as usual, which did include an earlier version of the Toronto Green Standard. There's still a huge gap. So how do we address that gap? And in Toronto, it does fall a lot on development because we have a very good transit system, and because a number of people and there's a population of about 250,000 who live right in the downtown, and they mostly walk and bicycle to work, so that, buildings become one of the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of climate mitigation. So in about 2006, we introduced the Toronto Green Standard. It was a voluntary piece at that time. And then we put our heads together and decided we should make it mandatory in 2009. So we introduced a report, and we divided it in two pieces so that what we could require through our existing authorizations that we have under the Planning Act, and in our case, the City of Toronto Act, we put together requirements, and then a second level, or tier 2, we call it, which we could provide incentives for. And it really has functioned over the last 13 years as a market transformation tool. It's led to advancements in the Ontario Building Code, as well as kind of setting the expectation for many other municipalities in Ontario. It's also intended to address both the climate and the biodiversity crisis, and it also advances the UN sustainability goals. So what we thought, and I know Lisa had produced one list, but I thought I wanted to expand on that, is that it advances the sustainable development goals of clean water, affordable and clean energy, industry and innovation, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, and life on land. The Green Standard itself is divided into, it has 5 performance categories, including air quality, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, water quality and efficiency, ecology and biodiversity, and circular economy and waste. And there are 3 standards. One is for city-owned projects, and what you were hearing from the Toronto Community Housing Association, from Alex is a lot about, from Peter, is putting that in effect, implementing that. And then mid to high rise, and that is our largest percentage of development within the City of Toronto. And then there is one for low rise, because of course it's very different. So we have the tier 1, which is mandatory, as I indicated, and then tier 2 and 3, which are voluntary. And then our city-owned facilities are required to meet a higher different standard, which is kind of a combination of tiers 2 and 3. So there's a number of minimum requirements, including green infrastructure, EV ready, green streets, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail. And then there are the tier 2 plus, which development charge refund is available for. So we also have, as I said, we have that goal of achieving net zero by 2040. And realized in 2021 that we weren't going to quite get there. So we advanced. So what we do is every 4 years, we update the Toronto Green Standard. And that involves a lot of consultation with industry and experts, our consultants, as well as the developers, in terms of, what is feasible for them to achieve. So we had a pathway set out that was clear, and then council decided that they needed to accelerate that. So that was accelerated so that our last version came into place in 2022, which was a year ago. That's version 4. And now as we move forward into version 5, it'll be a 3-year timeline. And so that we arrive at requiring near zero emissions in 2028. That's the goal. And so those buildings actually be built about 5 years later, the way the approval process and the construction process goes. And when we say near zero emissions versus net zero, what we mean is near zero because these will basically go over to either renewables or the electricity grid. And our electricity grid is, I think, supplied about 25% of it is supplied by gas. So another thing that we did last summer was to increase the amount of the refunds. So right now we provide development charges and have been set at a cap. So we increased it slightly, because we were hearing from developers that they couldn't quite get there even with the refund. They couldn't quite get to the next level. So we did, and it has been a positive result. We've had a number more of applications. So with version 4, we introduced 4 big moves. 100% electric vehicle parking, zero emissions buildings for our city facilities, an embodied carbon component, which I'll talk a bit more about, and green infrastructure and green streets. So we do require 100% electric vehicle ready with load sharing. We also introduced a provision for 15% of bike parking to be for electric bike spaces. That's for our new developments. So now, since 2022, our new city-owned buildings, which includes agencies, corporations, and divisions, they all have to be built to net zero. And there's a number that are currently under construction, including community centers, childcare centers. And then we also looked at emissions. So you're maybe aware that we've been focusing on building operations for these over the past few years, and we've introduced a new target for emissions, and that is the materials that you use for the construction of the building, and that comprises about 11% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is really understanding everything that goes into the manufacturing of a material, including emissions during the production, transporting it, installing it, etc., and also then end of life. So factoring all those in and then addressing that. So that we partnered on 2 studies that were funded by the Atmospheric Fund. And these studies resulted in some targets that we introduced into the Green Standard for both low-rise and for the mid to high-rise buildings. So for low-rise, we set a cap, and that was just introduced very recently. That's effective as of May 12th, and that is equal or less than 250 kilograms of CO2 emissions per metric ton. And then we introduced a target for Tier 2 of 350, and then for Tier 3. And then for city agencies, it is also 350. However, if they want the enhanced upfront embodied carbon assessment, they can strive for 250. And then in terms of circular economy, we introduced a life cycle impact reduction, the reuse of building materials. We asked that all construction waste go up to 75% diversion. So these are some of the sort of the performance metrics that we have included. Oh, and another new one actually was thinking about not just the building component, but the landscape, both the materials that you use and the plants, because you can reduce the emissions if you plant the right materials. And there's a project that does this very well, and the idea was that you enroll in that project. In terms of green, we have a new requirement for green streets, so that all new public streets, and we have many large developments that are for infill areas that do use public streets, and they have to be built to a green street standard. And then we ask, this is one of the evolutions of thinking, right? Because we do this every 4 years. We can go back and fix problems that we've had in the past that developers are experiencing. And one of the problems they were experiencing, it was very difficult to achieve the small, tight sites that we have in the city to retain 10 millimeters of every small rainfall event that falls, or 50% or 100% of what falls over the course of a year. So what we did is introduce an option where you could look at doing sort of above the basic green infrastructure and have an intensive and biodiverse green roof, expand your green roof area, have more bioretention at grade, have an area of reforestation, or provide pollinator habitat. And that was actually workshopped with both engineers and landscape architects and developers. And also another important thing is what's very, very difficult to get in an urban environment are trees. And there's a lot of competition, there's utilities in the way. So we require that there's enough soil volume for trees, and there's a formula we have to work that out, and we also require in the public frontage that there's 30 cubic meters of soil for every tree. And also we've introduced a new requirement, which is that you provide a soil volume plan at the time of complete application, so that there is space at the beginning of your thinking for trees, and not like what happened on the right side where there was no space for the trees because of utilities, and you ended up with having shrubs planted and not shade trees. So progress. So since we started in 2010, there's been over 3,500 developments that have been required to meet the Toronto Green Standard. We have 4 city-owned facilities to net zero under construction. We have over 155 projects that are targeting higher performance, that's higher than Tier 1. We have 50 enrolled in the development charge refund program right now, and we have actually delivered on 85 and more projects that have been certified. And these projects are certified post-construction by a third-party verifier that they have met the required higher performance, and then they're given a certificate and they're refunded on a portion of their development charges. So, and the fun fact as well is that in the versions so far, we figured there's 5.4 megatons of cumulative avoided emissions. We will have achieved that by 2050. And then with versions 5 and 6, there'll be an additional 25.5 megatons of avoided emissions, equivalent to about 200,000 cars off the road. So we feel that there's progress is made. So this is us, Lisa's contact information and my own, and happy to take questions. Figure out how to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Jane. Here, I can stop sharing for you.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate the presentation. And now that we've heard from these 4 individuals, organizations, and from 3 cities, City of Toronto, City of Brampton, and City of Ottawa, these various innovations that are happening throughout Canada. I think it's very clear for everybody in this group the importance that cities play when it comes to realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. We heard from 4 great examples and their contributions to achieving these Sustainable Development Goals. And for us at the Pavilion, it's important that we leverage these made in Canada urban innovations and transformations as examples that we can share across Canada, but also that we can share across the globe as well. I think the latest statistics for our cities are 55% currently live in cities across the globe, and that number is expected to increase to I believe it's over 65 by 2050. And then of course in Canada, we do have 80% living in cities as well. The reason I bring this up is just to emphasize the importance that cities can play in achieving these Sustainable Development Goals, and these examples are good practices. As the Pavilion continues to move on and work with these cities, these individuals, these examples, we are continuing to identify other made in Canada examples as well. So if you're here with us, please do stay tuned for that as well. One of the other areas that we're hoping to also work with the presenters here today and the other Made in Canada participants is really how we can transform these cities to become front-runner cities, as we call it, to really take the step towards being leaders within their respective sectors. And of course, the pavilion has been recognized as a global hub for UN Habitat's flagship program, SDG Cities Initiative. We're really aim to connect cities' priorities with the Sustainable Development Goals and with the Global Urban Monitoring Framework as well. And in this regard, setting baselines and understanding where are the opportunities and where are the challenges within cities. The SDG Cities Initiative can support by providing technical advisory tools and other financial tools as well. And it's really about connecting that value chain between data, strategic planning, decision-making, and ultimately impact investing. Where can we impact the most? So I do look towards our presenters here today to stay tuned as we follow up with you and looking at how we can take this conversation forward with SDG Cities Initiative further with the World Urban Pavilion as well. But perhaps that's a conversation for another time. And I'll turn it over now to our audience to ask various questions. And I do apologize to those who asked Peter Zimmerman a question. I'll let Peter answer those questions. Camilla Ween had asked, Camilla Ween is our close friend as well, had asked, what is the target for affordable units and the percentage? Peter, if you're still with us, perhaps I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think I'm off mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Peter.
Great. Okay, so we have two targets. One is the absolute bottom line, which is the replacement of all 2,083 initial rent geared to income units at Regent Park on the footprint of Regent Park. So we're delivering those replacement units. And then above and beyond that, we're trying to introduce as much affordable rental into the revitalized community as we can afford to deliver. So far, we've been able to include somewhere in the order of about 300 new affordable rental units. But by the end of the phase 4 and 5 plan, we will have introduced up to about 1,000 affordable rental in addition to those 2,083 RGI replacement units. So that's in relation to about 6,000 market units that will also be a part of the development. So that gives you a sense of the ratio and the absolute numbers.
And Peter, forgive me here. I think you somewhat answered Deanie Peters' question that was a follow-up to that. Will TCHC be seeking support subsidies required to build additional RGI units beyond the replacement commitment in phases 4 and 5? I think you sort of answered that already.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a bit of a nuanced question. That on the affordable side, absolutely, there's a clear pathway forward for us going through Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and seeking their support, and through some of the programs through the City of Toronto. We'll also be making applications to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for support with the green initiative components of the plan. But I think I'm not sure if this is exactly where Deanie was going with the question, but I'll assume that it's also around the whole issue of more rent geared to income housing, which is a pressing need. And the challenge that we have is that there really isn't a path forward right now. There is no government programs. There's nothing at the provincial or federal government that would support the introduction of new RGI, rent geared to income housing. And the challenge there, of course, is that it requires ongoing subsidy as opposed to a one-time capital infusion. So that's the big elephant in the room, I think, in a lot of these new affordable housing projects.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Peter. Are there any questions perhaps from the audience or from the speakers to the other speakers? You can use the raise hand function and I'll unmute you to ask your own question. While people think of their questions, I do see one from Pablo, directed again to you, Peter Zimmerman. What is impact in the value of land and housing with this revitalization?
What is the impact on the value of land? And
Yes.
I'm not quite sure how to respond to that question. And I think what maybe I don't, Pablo, maybe you could clarify. I think you're talking about the revenues or how it's changed the market through revitalization, but I'm not quite sure what's the question.
Pablo, I did request you to unmute yourself if you would like to clarify through voice.
Not hearing him?
Um,
Okay, all right. So I mean, I'll take a shot at what one of the things that's really important to know about Regent and our other revitalization projects is that there's a formula. Oh, sorry. There it is. It's coming back up. And that, let me just, I'll just finish this remark, which is that there's a formula that relies on our ability to capture land value, particularly at high market urban locations. So Regent is the best case in point. So we have our market partnerships. We've been able to derive significant land values because of the proximity to downtown, and those land values have escalated over time. So when we get to phase 4 and 5, we're not allowed to talk about the actual deal terms, but you can imagine we were getting our highest land values associated with that part of the project. Other ones we have going, Alex Park is another good example. Downtown, very, very intense real estate market. We're able to capture quite a bit of value to subsidize the replacement housing. So I think that may have been in the question, but I'm not entirely sure.
Thank you, Peter. Pablo, I look to you if you have any follow-ups on that. Otherwise, we can move to another question. So again, I do turn to the audience while Pablo perhaps responds through the chat. Are there any other questions from our audience or from the speakers to the other speakers? Alex, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's not a question, more like a comment. In fact, when he was mentioning about the development in Ottawa and also about TGS, and a bit is going back into our system of measuring sustainability, and the fact that right now we're doing work to expand that into, green infrastructure, maybe even to expand on I would say softer issues that are harder to measure with numbers, like EDI in particular, right? Equity, diversity, inclusiveness, and things like that. And I look the last, I would say, 6 months at SDGs, being a kind of consistent, internationally driven set of factors, and they include some of these, like issues regarding public health. And I was wondering part of this, and in fact, on some of the projects I'm working right now, mostly green infrastructure, I was looking at the use of the tool that comes associated with SDGs and to test that. And I don't know if my colleagues are looking into some of these, because in some instances, yeah, you use the regulatory framework. But you're particularly on the design side, you have, I don't know, public attraction, you have how to deal with indigenous people and all that. And there are things that are harder, and we try to do a composite integrator right now on a major project similar to West Donlands and Portland, but of course smaller at our scale. I don't know, that's just an idea, maybe at the future discussion to see, because it is a bit of a unifying framework, if you want, higher level international unifying framework that goes into quite a lot of details, and only to look at some of these questions, I think could be a good opportunity. I'm just asking what my colleagues are thinking about that, and maybe part of the public.
I could maybe add some comments to Alex's question, Alex. I would say, I agree in terms of sustainability and how do we measure it. And I think in the library parcel example, that's why we did go with the Canada Green Building Council zero carbon standard, because that was something that could be certified. It would be something that the developer would need to go through that organization. So it kind of saved admin work from the NCC side was a big reason. But when we were developing the criteria, that was more a requirement. But in terms of the actual design and the development, we made that as part of the criteria of the overall development plan. Like we really tried to emphasize it's a unified design. It's because I think we did get some concerns, I would say, Alex, during reviewing the proposals in terms of some of the sustainability factors or features of a building, not maybe addressing certain urban design aesthetic, I would say, like in terms of building performance, it tends to be a blockier form. And so we really had to emphasize that, we were looking for a very sustainable building while achieving design excellence. And is it a trade-off? I don't think it's a trade-off, but there's definitely a lot of different opinions about it. And so we always had to remind people that there's a strong sustainability component, and maybe some of the design features were other sustainability criteria. So there's definitely a lot of discussion in how do we achieve both, but we knew we had to look at it comprehensively. So the points really went to the overall development with kind of different sub bullets, but it was scored kind of in one criteria. So don't know if that helps answer the question, but to say, yeah, we do grapple with that as well, because there could be some see as trade-offs versus trying to get a comprehensive design.
Thank you, Hugh. And I do see Jane's hand is up as well.
So a couple of points to respond to that. Once, it's why we deliberately set the Toronto Green Standard as performance measures. So it's up to the designer to figure out how they want to address that versus being prescriptive. And the other point is that certainly the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN have come up again and again, most recently the last few months, and sort of made the pitch that we need to kind of tie them together in our official plan on a bigger piece, right? Because that's what we really want to do. And it gives us this overarching piece, and it gives us a commonality between all the different work that we're doing if we're all trying to meet those same objectives. And we probably are, and it's probably implicit, but just sort of spelling that out and having something concrete, I think is very valuable to us and helps us understand each other, especially at the global scale, right? What we're trying to do, and there are different ways or approaches of doing it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. And perhaps Eduardo Moreno, I know this is your expertise. Perhaps I turn to you as well.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I wanted to comment on what Alex mentioned. First of all, I'm very pleased that he referred to the Global Urban Monitoring Framework that when I was in UN Habitat we were working on, and to tell him that recently we had been trying to see how this framework not only can be applied to cities, but can also help to monitor some of the impacts that he was referring to, for instance, in indigenous populations or any other minorities in some cities and countries, and to invite him to tell him that we are working now to see how the Global Urban Monitoring Framework can start measuring some forms of quality of life in cities, understanding that quality of life will be a synthesis indicator that will gather several SDGs, as the last speaker mentioned on the SDGs, but with the idea that we could integrate also the views, the preference, the concerns of the populations in terms of specific monitoring tools. In other words, how we can open up to subjective forms of measurement, but trying to make them as objective as possible. And we are embarking in this work, and I think it will be extremely interesting. And also a different point, I think the question from Pablo was very relevant. You partially responded, but I would like to come back to that. How rehabilitation programs increase value in terms of land, in terms of housing, which is the direct impact of the rehabilitation in this kind of indicators. You mentioned more land value capture, but the idea is if in one specific, like your area of intervention, the cost of the housing or the land was $100, how much it increased over time, and who is benefiting from that beyond the land capture in terms of plus value, let's say. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm mute there. Thank you, Eduardo. Peter, if you would like to respond to Eduardo at his last remarks there.
Alex, I don't really have anything to contribute on that point. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Peter. So with that, I have one more question here, and then we'll close the meeting. We're about 6 minutes out from 1 p.m. And the last and final question here is from Adriana Docena, directed to all the participants. What are the most satisfying transformational aspects of your projects? And a follow-up, could the ability to continue receiving feedback on evolving interrelated initiatives be improved to better support synergistic nuances among project partners going forward? A little bit of a wordy question there. So I guess turning to all the speakers, what is the most satisfying transformational aspect of your project? And the second piece is, could feedback continue to help improve the outcome of the project partners going forward?
I don't mind.
Oh, sir, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. Sorry, I will go quickly. I want to say the first thing that came to my mind in terms of most satisfying aspects of the LeBreton Flats project was really a pathway that I was the project manager that was constructed last year. And so it sounds very simple, just a segregated pathway, but it runs through the spine of LeBreton Flats, and LeBreton Flats has been closed off to the public for decades. And so if you ride the LRT, you can see the new pathway between Bayview Station and Pimsey Station. And so I get so many compliments on it in terms of people walking through the site, people biking through the site, because it's their first time actually walking through LeBreton Flats. So I really do feel satisfied and honored to be part of that work to allow, you know, hundreds of thousands of people to visit the site now that couldn't in the last while. And so we do have a counter, so I'm always reading the numbers of how many people are going through the site. So I just wanted to say that was my project that came to mind. And in terms of the second question about interrelated initiatives and getting feedback, I would say that's a big part of our phasing plan and a big reason why we're developing parcel by parcel, phase by phase. It's really to learn from our previous offering, take kind of lessons learned forward. If there are things that aren't working, to try to adjust. If we didn't get a response that we thought we were going to get, if we need to tinker with kind of our requirements. So to be able to learn from each phase, I would say, and that's getting feedback from our stakeholders as well in that process. Thank you.
Well, that was a great answer. I wish I'm going to steal part of it, but I'll begin with what's the most satisfying thing that for me in Regent Park has been beyond the great urban design and the architecture and all the progress we've made and on sustainability. The thing that always brings it home is hearing long-term Regent Park residents talk about their sense of pride in the place that they live. And I think that's been one of the most incredible transformative aspects of what's gone on over the last 15 years has been, I think there has always been a strong community and there's been a tight-knit community, but that sense of pride in what's going on and the knowledge that that residents have played an integral role in shaping the path that we've taken. So that I think that's the thing that my big takeaway. I would agree that the ability to respond iteratively as we've kind of moved through this plan. And we took a certain amount of flack when we began having this conversation around the rezoning of the final two phases of Regent Park. And it was important to remind people that this has been ongoing and evolving work in progress. And we heard things that we, possibly could have done better. One of the things we heard was that there weren't opportunities for small enterprise and local businesses, and that in our first phases we had emphasized just getting any retail in there at all. So we had a lot of mainstream kind of Tim Hortons, getting in that first bank, getting in a big grocery store. And now we've heard we want opportunities for smaller businesses and micro enterprise, and that's included in the new plan. So it's been this learning as we've moved through, and that's what's I think has been a part of the success of Regent Park. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Peter. Jane, please go ahead.
I know we're almost at time, so I'll be quick, but it's for me the most satisfying piece is leading the change, because we have made a difference and we have a whole army of consultants and development review staff, hundreds and hundreds of people that are involved and engaged in making this happen. And that's not how it was when we started. So it's been a bit of an evolution over the past 13 years. And the last version, we trained well over 1,000 people who are all very closely involved in applying and implementing the green standard, as well as the other municipalities that we've been able to influence, as well as the Ontario Building Code. And the small satisfaction, seeing new buildings that have all these dots on the windows, they're bird friendly.
Thank you, Jane. And Alex, I know you typed up in chat here, perhaps final remarks, or are you good with your?
Yeah, I need to go. Yeah, that's very much it. And it was great to be here, share all this experience. Looking forward to the next events and discussions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you to our first participants in the Made in Canada Urban Innovations and Transformations. Much appreciation to all our speakers. City of Toronto, City of Brampton, and City of Ottawa here, and the respective organizations as well. We will have the second event occurring on June 27th, as well with 2 more in July. So please stay tuned and join us for that. And do stay tuned for the follow-up activities that will be coming out of this session. And everything will be posted online, and a final report will be published. Again, thank you so much, Jane, Alex, Peter. And Hugh, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.